On the line with us is Brian Murakesko. He's a practicing lawyer, practicing international law, and the author of a book, The Immortality Key. BrianMurakesko.com is his website. It's spelled Muraresku.com, and that's also his Twitter handle, Brian Murakesko. Brian, this fascinating hypothesis that psychedelics played a role in the creation of what we today know as modern Christianity. What started you digging into this?
Great to be here, Tom. So this is not my theory. I was a useless major in Latin and Greek and Sanskrit as an undergrad at Brown, and thought I was going to be either a priest or some kind of professional philosopher for the rest of my life, but wound up going to law school. And at the back of my mind stuck this idea of the best kept secret in history. At least that's what Houston Smith called it, one of the greatest religious scholars of the 20th century. And it came back on my radar, this concept of an ancient psychedelic sacrament, in 2007, when I was reading some of the first studies that were coming out of Johns Hopkins University about psilocybin, the active compound in so-called magic mushrooms. And what I was reading are testimonies from people, 2/3 of which were saying that it was the most meaningful experience of their entire lives, this one and only dose of psilocybin. It's strikingly similar to the kind of testimony that survives from Eleusis in ancient Greece, which welcomed everybody from Plato to Marcus Aurelius, this life-transforming event that erased the fear of death and guaranteed them an afterlife.
Well, having used psychedelics as a teenager, I can tell you it was a life-altering experience for me. And certainly we have a lot of associations between what we would refer to as pagan, pre-Christian religions, and things like, Santa Claus being basically a psychedelic mushroom, the Amanita mushroom, the red and white, and the flying reindeer, and the reindeer had to process this through their urine and all that. But that's all way post-foundational Christianity. That's, the contamination of Christianity in more modern times, certainly in the last 1,000 years, by indigenous people. You talk about the sacrament. Do you think that people were like passing out magic mushrooms? Here's the body of Christ, or spiked wine. Here's the blood of Christ.
I think there's a possibility that there was spiked wine in the ancient world. As a matter of fact, I spent the past 12 years looking for the scientific evidence. So all these wonky ideas from John Allegro in the 1970s and this trio of renegades, Gordon Wasson, Albert Hofmann, who synthesizes LSD, obviously, and Carl Ruck at Boston University. In 1978, they released this idea that the ancient Greeks were using drugs to find God, and maybe they passed it on to the first Christians. But what inspired me in the wake of these psilocybin trials in 2007, 2008, was to look for more scientific data. So in addition to all this psychopharmacological data, I started digging into these old journals in archaeobotany and archaeochemistry, and it's this relatively new science where people are going out and digging into these excavations and finding chalices, testing them chemically to see what was in there. And what you find, time and again, are ancient specimens of wine that were in fact spiked with different plants and herbs. And sometimes they're very innocuous, but at other times I found this one find dated to 79 AD, for example, where the wine was spiked with opium, cannabis, henbane, and black nightshade at the right dose. Pretty visionary stuff.
Yeah, and nightshade, with the belladonna and the atropine in it, will produce a vivid hallucinatory state. That's fascinating. What have you seen? The evidence is increasingly large that psychedelics can be powerful therapeutic tools for things like depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder. And in fact, here in Oregon, one of the things that's on our ballot that we voted on this just last week, when we mailed our ballots in, was whether to legalize psilocybin in this state. And of course, it would take a federal change, but I'm guessing that's going to be coming. Are you seeing any kind of a trend among people who identify as Christians? I know that there are some folks who don't identify as Christians who openly, actively use these psychedelic substances as sacraments, both some Native American groups and some neo-pagan groups and whatnot. But within Christianity, established Christianity in the United States or around the world, do you see any move back toward psychoactive substances?
It's interesting. In this country, it's impossible to forecast where this is going to go. But it's worth pointing out some of these traditions already exist in some Christian sects. If you think of the Santo Daime in Brazil, for example, kind of a syncretic blend of this ayahuasca church as their sacrament. Exactly, ayahuasca with their version of Christianity. And that's really what my book is about. I mean, just as today you can go around the world and find 33,000 denominations of Christianity, I think that was the case from the very beginning, and there were always these alternative Eucharists. Now, are those to be incorporated in some kind of modern psychedelic church? I don't know, but I know with the FDA getting involved in some of these clinical trials and what's happening in Oregon, it's going to be a very exciting next 10 years to see how this all develops.
Yeah, the feds are doing some of this too, isn't the Veterans Administration experimenting with psychedelics, or is it a different group that's working with veterans with PTSD?
I think so. Yeah, we have some MDMA trials that are now headed to phase 2, phase 3, looking at PTSD. And there's a number of trials already in phase 2, largely with psilocybin, looking at everything from anxiety, depression, to end-of-life distress. And there's a really interesting crossover there. If you think about palliative care, for example, people who are suffering at the end of life, these single-dose interventions, and in particular, the mystical experience that happens in these experiments is directly correlated with the depths of the healthy outcome. People see a reduction in anxiety and depression from just a single intervention, and the line between one person's psychology and one person's spirituality seems to be getting thinner, and so it'll be interesting to see in 5 to 10 years what becomes of all this research.
Yeah, it is starting to pop up in what's the word? It's not palliative care, hospice care. In end of life treatments. I remember when my father was dying, and how much I wished I could share psychedelics with him. In fact, I proposed that to him when I was 16. He was not amused. That was 1967, but. One of the reports that I'm hearing is that people who are gravely ill, who know that they're on death's door, who try psychedelics, find that their fear of death goes away. Is that a consistent thing across the literature, Brian?
It seems to be fairly consistent, and the whole reason I dug into this mystery, because again, it reminded me of the kind of testimony from the ancient world where someone like Plato claimed to have witnessed, right? There's a vision of this mystery that obliterates the fear of death and transforms you into an immortal. I mean, in some of these more modern experiments, I talked to a woman named Dinah Baser, by the way, who participated in the NYU experiments. They published this joint finding with Hopkins in 2016, particularly about cancer patients receiving psilocybin. Dinah Baser, one of these volunteers, describes her one and only dose as being bathed in God's love. Now she's an atheist, but she has this deeply life-transforming mystical experience, and it's just going to be so interesting to see where this goes.
Yeah, that was absolutely my experience as a teenager, and it has never left me. And I'm pushing 70 here, so I'm with you.